The dinner rush at the Celestial Gardens had never felt this intense. Daniel Reed wiped down his section for the third time, making sure every glass sparkled under the soft lighting. His hands moved on autopilot after 2 years of serving the galaxy's wealthiest beings. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, the entire restaurant staff had been briefed 3 times about proper protocol, acceptable conversation topics, and the exact angle to bow when approaching table 7. Emperor Dramath was coming to dinner. Daniel had seen plenty of important guests before. Ambassadors, corporate moguls, even a few minor royals from systems he couldn't pronounce. But the Saurian Emperor was something else entirely. His species had been traveling between stars when humans were still figuring out agriculture. They ruled a quarter of known space with absolute authority, and their military could crush Earth's entire defense fleet before lunch. "Reed, you're on the Imperial table." His manager's voice cut through his thoughts. Daniel turned, certain he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me. The Saurian delegation requested our most experienced server." "That's you." The manager looked like he'd rather assign anyone else, but orders were orders. "Try not to start a war." The kitchen doors swung open, and Daniel caught a glimpse of the preparation happening inside. Chefs moved with frantic precision, preparing dishes that cost more than Daniel made in a month. He straightened his uniform and checked his reflection in a polished panel. At 28, he still looked younger than his years. Brown hair, average height, nothing remarkable. Just another human trying to make enough credits to send home. His sister needed those credits. The medical bills from Earth kept coming, and Sarah's treatment wasn't getting any cheaper. Every shift, every tip, every extra hour went into keeping her alive. Tonight's assignment could mean a bonus that would cover 2 months of medication. The restaurant's main entrance chimed with a tone reserved for the highest-tier guests. Daniel moved to his station near table 7, keeping his expression neutral as he'd been trained. The first guards entered, massive saurians in ceremonial armor that probably weighed more than Daniel did. Their scales gleamed like polished bronze, and their eyes swept the room with practiced vigilance. Then Emperor Dramath entered, and the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath that he was enormous, even by Saurian standards. His scales were deep crimson edged with gold, marking his royal bloodline. Ancient scars crossed his chest and arms, remnants of wars fought before humanity ever left their home planet. His eyes were golden and sharp, missing nothing. When he moved, it was with the confidence of someone who had never needed to doubt his power. But it was the small bundle in the attendant's arms that made Daniel's heart skip. A baby dragon, no bigger than a house cat, with scales that shimmered between blue and silver. The hatchling squirmed and made small chirping sounds, tiny wisps of smoke puffing from his nostrils. "Crown Prince Salith," the head server whispered to the staff. "The Emperor's only heir. Whatever you do, don't look directly at him for more than a moment." Daniel nodded, though he found it hard not to stare. He'd never seen a saurian hatchling before. Most species kept their young far from public view, especially royalty. The fact that Dramath brought his son to a diplomatic dinner spoke to either confidence or necessity. The Imperial party settled at their table. Daniel approached with the menu tablets, keeping his movements slow and respectful. Saurians viewed quick motions as threatening, another detail from the briefing. He bowed at exactly 30 degrees and spoke in formal galactic standard. "Your Imperial Majesty, welcome to the Celestial Gardens. I am Daniel, and I will have the honor of serving you this evening." Dramath's golden eyes fixed on him for a moment. Daniel felt like an insect under a microscope. Then the Emperor nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both acknowledgement and dismissal. The other guests at the diplomatic table were a mix of species. A Krill ambassador with her crystalline exoskeleton, 2 Horthian trade ministers, and a Centauri mediator who looked as nervous as Daniel felt. They were here to negotiate something important, probably a trade agreement or territorial dispute. Daniel didn't need to know the details. He just needed to serve drinks and not cause an incident. Baby Salith started fussing halfway through the first course. The attendant tried to soothe him, but the hatchling was having none of it. His chirps grew louder, more insistent. Small puffs of smoke became tiny jets of flame that made the nearby guards tense. "He's teething," the attendant explained in Saurian, though Daniel's translator caught it. The new teeth caused discomfort. The Emperor reached over and gently stroked his son's head. The gesture was surprisingly tender from such a fearsome being. Salith calmed for a moment, then started squirming again. His little claws scraped against the attendant's arms, seeking freedom. Daniel delivered the second course, a delicacy from the Saurian homeworld that smelled of sulfur and spices. He was backing away when he noticed movement from the corner of his eye. Baby Salith had wriggled free from the attendant's grasp. The hatchling tumbled onto the floor with a surprised squeak and immediately started crawling toward the restaurant's centerpiece, the decorative fountain that Daniel's training screamed at him not to interfere with imperial business. The guards were already moving, though their ceremonial armor slowed them. The attendant lunged but missed as the curious hatchling picked up speed, drawn by the splashing water. Everything happened in seconds. Salith reached the fountain's edge, pulled himself up on tiny claws, and toppled forward into the water with a splash. The cheerful chirps turned into distressed shrieks. The water, treated with chemicals to create its prismatic effect, was toxic to Saurian biology. The guards froze, bound by protocols about touching royalty without permission. The attendant screamed. Emperor Dramath rose with a roar that shook the windows, but he was too far away, too large to reach into the fountain quickly. Daniel dropped the tray he was holding and ran. He didn't think about protocol or consequences or the fact that humans weren't supposed to touch Saurian royalty under penalty of death. He only thought about the drowning baby whose scales were already turning an alarming shade of blue. His hands plunged into the cold water, and he lifted the convulsing hatchling out. Water dripped from Daniel's arms as he cradled the choking hatchling against his chest. Salith's small body shook violently, his scales slick with the toxic fountain water. Foam bubbled from the baby dragon's mouth, and his breathing came in terrible gasps. The cheerful chirps from moments ago had become desperate wheezes. The entire restaurant stood frozen in horrified silence. Daniel's mind raced through his first aid training from Earth, trying to remember anything that might apply to a species that breathed fire. Saurians had 2 breathing passages he recalled from a documentary he'd watched during his lunch break months ago. One for air, one for generating their internal flames. The hatchling had inhaled water into both. "Move aside, human." One of the guards finally barked, but Daniel was already acting. He positioned Salith carefully, supporting the delicate head with one hand while his other palm pressed gently against the hatchling's back. Not too hard. The bones felt fragile under the scales, like bird bones, hollow, and light .5 quick blows between the shoulder blades, angled downward. That's what the training said for choking. Daniel prayed it worked the same for dragons. Nothing happened. Salith's struggles grew weaker. Daniel adjusted his grip and tried again, firmer this time. The baby's body convulsed, and suddenly a rush of water expelled from his mouth along with a weak spurt of flame. The hatchling gasped, pulling in air with a sound like tearing paper. More water came up, more flame. Then finally, blessedly, Salith drew a full breath and started crying. The sound was loud and angry, and the most beautiful thing Daniel had ever heard. He held the trembling hatchling close, instinctively rocking him the way he'd seen parents comfort upset children. Salith's claws dug into his uniform, and the baby pressed his scaled head against Daniel's chest, still crying but breathing. Breathing meant alive. Alive meant Daniel hadn't just failed spectacularly. Step away from the crown prince immediately. The guard's voice was closer now, sharp with authority and barely contained violence. Daniel looked up and felt his stomach drop. He was surrounded by Saurian guards, their hands on their weapons. Beyond them, Emperor Dramath stood like a statue carved from rage and fear. His golden eyes blazed with an intensity that made Daniel want to disappear. The other dinner guests had backed away, some diving under tables. This was it. He'd touched imperial royalty. Even saving the heir's life might not excuse such a violation. Daniel had heard stories about Saurian law, how rigid it was, how severely it punished breaches of protocol. His mind flashed to Sarah, to who would send her the medication money now. But he couldn't make himself regret it. Salith was breathing. That mattered more than whatever came next. Imperial physicians rushed forward, their equipment humming with advanced technology. Daniel carefully handed over the hatchling, though Salith made a small sound of protest and tried to cling to him. The doctors whisked the baby away to a private room, scanners already playing over his small form. Daniel stood there, dripping and shaking, suddenly very aware that he was surrounded by armed guards who serve an emperor whose son had nearly died. His manager appeared, face white as snow, stammering apologies that no one listened to. Other staff members peeked out from the kitchen, their expressions mixing relief and horror. "What is your name, human?" Emperor Dramath's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. "Daniel Reed, your Imperial Majesty." His voice came out steadier than he felt. "I'm a waiter here. I apologize for touching the Crown Prince without permission, but he was drowning and Why did you act when my guards hesitated?" The Emperor moved closer, each step deliberate. He towered over Daniel, scales gleaming in the restaurant lighting. This close, Daniel could see the weight of centuries in those golden eyes. The honest answer came out before Daniel could think better of it. He needed help. Nothing else mattered. Silence stretched between them. The Emperor studied him with an intensity that felt like being weighed and measured against some cosmic scale. Daniel met his gaze, knowing that looking away would be worse than whatever judgment was coming. He'd broken their laws, yes, but he'd do it again. Some things transcended rules. "My son was dying," Dramath said finally, his voice carrying to every corner of the restaurant. "Your guards, trained warriors all, froze because protocol forbade them to touch him without direct command." The attendant panicked. "I was too far away." He paused, his expression unreadable. A human waiter, whose species we consider primitive and clumsy, did not hesitate. Daniel wasn't sure if that was accusation or observation. He waited, heart pounding. "By Saurian law, you have touched the Crown Prince without authorization. The penalty is severe." The Emperor's claws extended slightly, and Daniel heard weapons being drawn behind him. "However, by that same law, one who saves an imperial life holds a sacred position. You have created a paradox, Daniel Reed. I wasn't thinking about laws, Your Majesty. I was thinking about your son." Something flickered in the Emperor's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. That much is evident. Dramath turned to address the room, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Let it be known throughout the Empire. This human holds the Emperor's life debt. He is under my personal protection. Any who harm him answer to me." Gasps echoed through the restaurant. Even the guards looked shocked. A life debt from the Saurian Emperor was legendary, the stuff of history books and ancient ballads. It had never, in thousands of years of imperial history, been granted to a human. Daniel barely processed the words. "Is Salith going to be okay?" The Emperor blinked, as if the question surprised him. Before he could answer, a physician emerged from the private room. "The Crown Prince is stable, Your Majesty. The human's actions prevented permanent damage. Another 30 seconds, and we would have lost him." Daniel's knees went weak with relief. Daniel's apartment had never felt this crowded. News drones hovered outside his window, their cameras pressing against the glass. His message inbox overflowed with thousands of communications from beings across the galaxy. Some congratulated him. Others called him a fraud, claiming humans were manipulating their way into galactic politics. A few even threatened violence, though those messages vanished quickly after the Emperor's declaration of protection. 3 days had passed since the incident. 3 days of chaos that left Daniel exhausted and confused. The restaurant had given him paid leave, which sounded generous until he realized they were terrified of the attention. His co-workers sent messages ranging from genuine concern to thinly veiled jealousy. Everyone wanted to know what came next. Daniel wanted to know the same thing, that he stood at his window, watching the station's artificial day cycle shift toward evening. Harmony Point was a neutral territory, a massive space station where species mingled for trade and diplomacy. Daniel had come here because waiter jobs paid better than anything on Earth. The plan had been simple: work for 5 years, send money home for Sarah's treatment, then return and figure out a real career. Now he'd somehow become entangled with the most powerful family in known space. His communicator chimed with a priority signal, the kind that couldn't be ignored. Daniel answered. An Asaurian officer appeared on the screen, his scales a deep military green. Daniel Reed, you are summoned to the Imperial vessel Crimson Dawn. Transportation will arrive in 1 hour. Attendance is mandatory. The connection ended before Daniel could ask questions. He stared at the blank screen, heart racing. Summoned to the Imperial ship. This was either the greatest honor of his life or the most polite execution notice in history. He changed into his cleanest clothes, which weren't saying much on a waiter's salary. His hands shook as he sealed his jacket. Before leaving, he recorded a message to Sarah, keeping his voice steady even though his thoughts spiraled. If something happened to him, she needed to know where the emergency credits were stored, which accounts held what, who to contact. I love you, sis, he finished. Whatever happens, remember that. The transport arrived exactly on time, a sleek shuttle that drew stares from everyone in the station's docking bay. Saurian guards escorted him aboard with professional courtesy that felt more frightening than outright hostility. At least hostility he could understand. This polite efficiency left him guessing. The Crimson Dawn was breathtaking. Daniel had seen pictures of Imperial vessels, but they hadn't prepared him for the reality. Halls wide enough to accommodate the Emperor's massive frame were decorated with medals Daniel couldn't name. Ancient battle standards hung from vaulted ceilings. Every surface spoke of power accumulated over millennia. Crew members stopped to stare as he passed. A human, walking freely through their sacred spaces. Daniel kept his eyes forward and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. They brought him to a private chamber that might have been a sitting room or a throne room. He couldn't tell. Emperor Dramath stood by a massive window, showing the stars beyond, his silhouette dark against the cosmic backdrop. He turned as Daniel entered, and those golden eyes fixed on him with the same unsettling intensity as before. Leave us, Dramath commanded, and the guards departed without question. Daniel was alone with the Emperor. His mouth went dry. Do you know why you are here, Daniel Reed? The Emperor's voice was calmer than at the restaurant, but no less commanding. No, Your Majesty. I have a problem. Dramath moved away from the window, his claws clicking softly on the polished floor. A life debt is not a simple matter among my people. It must be fulfilled, but how does an emperor repay someone who has everything they need? You saved my son. There is no currency, no title, no territory that equals such an act. Daniel didn't know what to say, so he waited. I could give you wealth beyond measure. Enough credits to buy a continent on your earth. I could grant you noble status, make you a governor of some distant world. The emperor paused, studying him. But I think you would refuse such things. You did not act seeking reward. I just helped a child who was in danger, Your Majesty. Exactly. Dramath's expression shifted, becoming almost thoughtful. My son is the heir to an empire that spans thousands of worlds. From the moment of his hatching, he has been surrounded by people who see the crown prince first and the child second. Advisors who calculate his value in political terms. Guards who protect the symbol more than the person. Daniel began to understand where this was going, and it made his chest tight. You saw a drowning child. Nothing more, nothing less. The Emperor's voice softened slightly. That is rarer than you know. I want someone in my son's life who will always see him that way, who will care for Salith, not the crown prince. Your Majesty, I'm not qualified to. You are more qualified than anyone in this empire. Dramath moved closer. I offer you a position in the imperial household. Cultural liaison, officially. Unofficially, a companion to my son as he grows. Someone who will treat him as a person, teach him to see others the same way. Daniel's mind reeled. I have responsibilities. My sister on Earth needs full medical care, provided immediately and maintained for life. Your family will want for nothing. The Emperor's tone made it clear this wasn't negotiation. You would live here, on this ship, or on the homeworld. You would be part of his household, his daily life. It would mean leaving everything you know. For how long? Years. Possibly decades. Saurian children develop slower than humans. Dramath studied him. I'm asking you to give up your life as you know it. In return, you give my son something I cannot. A friend who chose him, not the crown he wears. Daniel thought of Sarah finally getting the treatment she needed without him constantly scrambling for credits. He thought of going home, of the life he planned. Then he thought of baby Salif, crying and scared, clinging to him in the restaurant. Some choices weren't really choices at all. I accept your majesty. The imperial nursery was larger than Daniel's entire apartment had been. Soft lighting filtered through crystal panels, casting gentle colors across walls decorated with murals of Saurian history. Temperature controls maintained the exact warmth hatchlings needed. Everything was designed for safety, comfort, and befitting a crown prince. Daniel felt completely out of place. You will address Lady Seriva with proper respect at all times, General Thros growled, his scarred scales making him look even more intimidating than most Saurians. She has raised 3 generations of imperial offspring. Your presence here does not diminish her authority. I understand, General. Daniel had been receiving instructions for 2 hours, and his head spun with protocols. How to hold the crown prince. How to speak in his presence. What foods were appropriate. What games were acceptable. Which histories must be taught first. Everything was rules and tradition and proper procedure. The door opened, and Lady Seriva entered carrying baby Salif. She was older, her scales dulled slightly with age, but her eyes were sharp and assessing. The hatchling squirmed in her arms, making small sounds that Daniel had learned meant he was looking for something. The moment Salif saw Daniel, he chirped excitedly and reached out with his small claws. Lady Seriva's expression flickered with something between surprise and annoyance. She approached and, with obvious reluctance, transferred the hatchling to Daniel's arms. Salif immediately settled, pressing his scaled head against Daniel's chest and making a sound almost like purring. He has been fussy since the incident, Seriva admitted, her tone neutral. You appear to calm him. Daniel gently stroked the hatchling's head, feeling the warm scales under his fingers. Maybe I just smell familiar now. Humans have distinct scents compared to other species. General Thros snorted. A polite way of saying your kind smells strange. The general speaks bluntly, but he is not wrong, Seriva said, though her expression softened slightly as she watched Salif. However, the crown prince has imprinted on your scent. This is actually advantageous. It means he will accept your presence readily. The first weeks were harder than anything Daniel had experienced. He woke at times aligned with Saurian cycles, not human ones. The food made him sick until the kitchen staff figured out what his biology could handle. His quarters were comfortable but isolated, and the crew members who passed him in the corridors rarely made eye contact. He was a human in a Saurian world, and they made sure he never forgot it. But Salif didn't care about any of that. The hatchling lit up when Daniel entered the nursery. They spent hours together, with Daniel learning to understand the different chirps and sounds. Hungry chirp, tired chirp, playful chirp, scared chirp. He learned to check the temperature of Salif's scales to know if he was too warm or too cold. He figured out which toys the hatchling liked, which stories made him drowsy. Lady Seriva watched everything with critical eyes, correcting Daniel when he made mistakes, but grudgingly acknowledging when he did well. You have instinct for childcare, she said one evening as Daniel rocked Salif to sleep. This is unexpected in one so young and unmated. I helped raise my sister, Daniel explained quietly, mindful of the sleeping hatchling. Our parents worked long hours. I learned early. Something in Seriva's expression changed. You understand sacrifice, then? Yes, ma'am. From that day, she was less cold. Not warm, exactly, but less like she was waiting for him to fail. General Thros was a harder case. The security chief made his displeasure known at every opportunity. A human near the crown prince. It is improper, dangerous. Your species is too fragile, too unpredictable. With respect, General, I'm not here to be a guard. I'm here to be a friend. Friends can betray. Friends can fail. Thros moved closer, intimidating even without trying. If harm comes to that hatchling because of your inadequacy, No protection from the Emperor will save you. Daniel met his gaze steadily. If harm comes to him, I won't need saving. I'll already be dead protecting him. The general studied him for a long moment, then nodded once and walked away. It wasn't approval, but it might have been respect. Months passed. Daniel established routines with Salith, mixing Saurian traditions with things from his own childhood. He sang Earth lullabies in addition to the formal Saurian ones. He told stories from human mythology alongside tales of ancient dragon warriors. Salith absorbed everything with a child's endless curiosity, learning to understand both languages before he could properly speak either. Emperor Dramath visited regularly, and each time Daniel saw him, watching silently from the doorway before announcing himself. The Emperor observed how Daniel played with Salith, teaching the hatchling counting through games rather than formal recitation. How Daniel answered endless why questions with patience instead of authority. One evening, after Salith had finally fallen asleep, the Emperor asked Daniel to walk with him through the ship's observation deck. "You have changed the household," Dramath said, gazing at the stars beyond the transparent hull. "The servants speak of it. Lady Seriva reports that my son is developing faster than expected. Even General Thras admits you are adequate." Daniel smiled slightly. "High praise from the general. You do not know how high." The Emperor turned to face him. "My son laughs now. Real laughter, not the formal sounds appropriate to his station. He asks questions freely instead of waiting for permission. He is becoming curious and confident." Dramath paused. "He is becoming himself, not just the role we prepared for him. Isn't that what you wanted, Your Majesty?" "Yes, but seeing it happen makes me realize how much I lost in my own childhood." The Emperor's expression was unreadable. "I was raised to be Emperor first, person second. The crown was everything. My own father never played games with me, never answered silly questions, never simply held me without purpose." Daniel didn't know what to say to that. "You have taught me something," Daniel read. "Sometimes wisdom comes not from tradition, but from seeing things clearly, without the weight of centuries clouding judgment." Dramath looked back toward where Salith slept. "My son will be a better emperor than I am, because he will first be a better person. And that is because of you." 2 years into his service, Daniel had stopped feeling like an outsider. The crew greeted him by name now. Lady Seriva asked his opinion on Salith's education. Even General Thras occasionally nodded in approval. The imperial household had become something like family, strange as that seemed. Salith had grown from a tiny hatchling into a young dragon child, still small, but full of energy and questions. He followed Daniel everywhere. His vocabulary split equally between Saurian formal speech and English casual phrases that made the nobles wince. "Teacher Daniel, why do stars make different colors?" Salith asked one afternoon, pressing his snout against the observation window. "Different temperatures," Daniel explained, kneeling beside him. "Hot stars burn blue-white, cooler ones are red. Medium ones like Sol, that's Earth star, burn yellow. Earth is your home world." Salith's tone made it a statement and question together. "Will you go back there someday?" The question hit harder than Daniel expected. "I don't know, Salith. Maybe when you're older and don't need me anymore." "I will always need you." Salith pressed against him, scales warm. "You are my friend." Daniel hugged the young dragon gently. "In your mind?" The peaceful routine shattered that evening when alarms wailed through the ship. Daniel was reading Salith a bedtime story when General Thras burst into the nursery, his expression grim. "Emergency council meeting. The Emperor wants you there." "Me? Why would now human?" "Lady Seriva will watch the Crown Prince." Daniel had never seen the war room before. It was all tactical displays and grim-faced advisors. Emperor Dramath stood at the center, surrounded by military officers and diplomatic staff. Everyone fell silent when Daniel entered. "We have a situation," the Emperor said without preamble. "Human colonists have established a settlement on Dravik 3. This world falls within territory we claimed 600 years ago. My advisors say this is an act of aggression requiring immediate military response." Daniel's stomach dropped. War between humans and Saurians would be a massacre. Earth's forces couldn't stand against the Empire's might. Your Majesty, may I ask a question? Daniel kept his voice steady despite his racing heart. Speak. Did the human colonists know they were in Saurian territory? A hawk-faced advisor hissed. Ignorance is not an excuse for invasion. I'm not excusing anything, Lord Advisor. I'm asking if they knew. Daniel looked at the star map displayed above the table. Earth star charts are outdated. We've only been traveling to other systems for 70 years. The Saurian Empire has been mapping space for millennia. Is it possible this was a mistake rather than an insult? Mistakes have consequences, General Thros growled. We cannot appear weak. No one thinks the Empire is weak, Daniel said carefully. But there's a difference between strength and wisdom. Crushing a few hundred colonists who made a mapping error doesn't demonstrate power. It just demonstrates cruelty. The room erupted. Advisors shouted over each other. Some demanded Daniel's removal for his insolence. Others argued about human intentions and treaty violations. Through it all, Emperor Dramath remained silent, his golden eyes fixed on Daniel. Finally, he raised one clawed hand and silence fell. Continue, Daniel read. You see something we do not. Daniel took a breath. The colonists need to leave Dravik 3. That's not in question. But how we handle this sets a precedent. If the Empire destroys them, other species will see it as proof that humans and Saurians can never coexist peacefully. Every diplomatic bridge we've built gets burned. And what do you propose? The Emperor's tone was unreadable. Joint investigation. Send representatives from both sides to examine the star charts, determine how the error occurred. The colonists relocate with Empire assistance rather than military force. New protocols get established to prevent future mistakes. Daniel met the Emperor's gaze. Show the galaxy that the Empire is powerful enough to be merciful. Mercy is weakness, one admiral snarled. Is it? Daniel gestured to the tactical display. The Empire has the military strength to conquer half the known galaxy. Everyone knows this. But conquest isn't what makes you powerful. It's the fact that you choose not to conquer. That's real power. The power to destroy, but choosing a better path. The room fell silent. Emperor Dramath studied the star map, his expression thoughtful. General Thros, prepare a diplomatic mission to Dravik 3. We will investigate as Daniel suggests. The Emperor's voice carried absolute authority. Inform the human government that we seek peaceful resolution but expect full cooperation. The advisors looked stunned. Thros looked like he'd swallowed something sour, but nodded. As you command, Your Majesty. This meeting is concluded. Daniel Reed, remain. Everyone filed out, leaving Daniel alone with the Emperor once again. His legs felt like water. Had he just overstepped so badly that even Imperial protection couldn't save him? Do you know what you have done? Dramath asked quietly. Probably ended my career here, Your Majesty. You have given me perspective I lacked. The Emperor moved to the window, his reflection ghostly in the transparent hull. For 2,000 years, I have ruled with absolute authority. My word is law. My judgment is final. And in all that time, no one has challenged me the way you did today. I apologize if I do not apologize. Dramath turned, and his expression was almost sad. I realized something watching you with my son. You treat him as a person first, royalty second. Today you did the same with me. You spoke truth instead of what you thought I wanted to hear. The colonists don't deserve to die for a mapping error, Your Majesty. No, they do not. The Emperor's voice was soft, and I was prepared to kill them anyway, because that is what tradition demanded. What my advisors expected. What I have always done. He paused. You have shown me that there can be strength in mercy, wisdom in restraint. These are not Saurian concepts. These are human concepts. They're just good concepts, Your Majesty. Humanity doesn't own them. Perhaps, but your species practices them more readily than mine. Dramath's golden eyes gleamed. I brought you here to teach my son. I did not realize you would teach me as well. 5 years after pulling a drowning hatchling from a fountain, Daniel stood in the grand hall of the Saurian homeworld. The chamber was ancient beyond human comprehension, its walls carved from living crystal that pulsed with inner light. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species filled the space, all waiting to hear Emperor Dramath speak. Salith stood beside Daniel, now tall enough to reach his shoulder. The young dragon wore formal robes marking him as crown prince, but he kept glancing at Daniel with barely contained excitement. They both knew what was coming. Friends and allies of the Empire, Dramath's voice carried through the hall without amplification. Today marks a new chapter in our history. For millennia, we have stood apart from younger species, believing our age gave us wisdom they lacked. We were wrong. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Saurian nobles shifted uncomfortably. Emperors didn't admit mistakes. 5 years ago, my son nearly died because rigid protocol prevented those trained to protect him from acting. A human, a species we considered primitive, did not hesitate. Daniel Reed saved the crown prince because he saw a child in danger. Nothing more complicated than that. Dramath's golden eyes found Daniel in the crowd. In doing so, he saved more than one life. He saved me from my own arrogance. Daniel felt his face flush as thousands of eyes turned his way. Since that day, Daniel has been part of my household. He has taught my son not just languages and games, but how to see beings as individuals rather than categories. He has taught my advisors that wisdom sometimes wears humble clothes. He has taught me that strength includes knowing when not to use force. The Emperor paused. The Dravik 3 incident could have sparked war. Instead, it became the foundation for new cooperation between our species. All because one human suggested we choose understanding over anger. Salith nudged Daniel gently. He is talking about you, teacher. I noticed, Daniel whispered back. Today I announced the Imperial Exchange Initiative, Dramath continued. Humans will be welcomed into positions throughout the Empire, not as servants, but as partners. We will learn from each other. Human children and Saurian hatchlings will study together, play together, grow together. He gestured to a display that showed schools being built, exchange programs being established, cultural centers opening on both Earth and the Saurian homeworld. The crowd erupted in reactions ranging from enthusiastic approval to outraged protest. Emperor Dramath let them talk for a moment, then raised his hand for silence. I know this troubles some of you. You believe humans are too young, too undisciplined, too different. I believed this once as well. His voice softened. Then I watched my son learn from one. I watched Daniel treat him not as a future emperor, but as a child who needed guidance, laughter, and love. I watched him grow into someone who questions rather than simply accepts, who thinks before acting, who considers others before himself. Salith stood straighter, pride evident in his posture. These are not Saurian traits alone. These are not human traits alone. These are the traits of good beings, regardless of how many years their species has traveled the stars. Dramath's gaze swept the hall. If we are truly as wise as we claim, we will recognize wisdom in others, even when it comes from unexpected sources. After the ceremony, Daniel found himself in the Imperial Gardens with Salith and the Emperor. The young dragon was practically vibrating with energy. Does this mean more humans will come here? Will I get to meet others like Teacher Daniel? Many others, Dramath confirmed. The first group arrives next month. Students, teachers, craftspeople, artists. We have much to learn from each other. Salith bounded off to examine a flowering crystal tree, leaving Daniel alone with the Emperor. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the young dragon explore. I received a message from your sister, Dramath said eventually. She graduates from medical school next month. She wants you to attend. Daniel's throat tightened. I didn't know she'd contacted you directly. She wished to thank me for funding her treatment and education. She also said something interesting. The Emperor glanced at him. She said you taught her that helping others matters more than helping yourself. That you sacrificed years away from family because a child needed you. Sarah always understood things better than me. I think you both understand quite well. Dramath was quiet for a moment. You should go to her graduation. The Crimson Dawn will take you to Earth and wait as long as you need. But Salith is 7 years old now, and while he will miss you terribly, he is capable of a few weeks without his teacher. The Emperor's tone was gentle. You have given much to my family, Daniel Reed. It is time you spent time with your own. Daniel felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Thank you, Your Majesty. Call me Dramath. We are beyond formality now, I think. 3 weeks later, Daniel stood in a park on Earth, watching children play. Human children and a few young Saurians, part of the first exchange group. They ran together, laughed together, argued over game rules, and settled their disputes. A human girl was teaching a Saurian boy to jump rope. A young dragon was showing human kids how to carefully breathe smoke rings. Salith sat beside him on the bench, his scales gleaming in Earth's sunlight. Your world is beautiful, teacher. The sky is so blue. Different from the home world. Different is good. Father says different means learning. Salith watched the children. Do you think they will be friends when they grow up? Like we are. Daniel smiled. I think they already are friends, Salith. That's the whole point. An elderly woman walking past paused, staring at them. Are you Daniel Reed? The one who saved the prince? Yes, ma'am. She shook her head in wonder. My grandson is in that exchange program. Going to study on the Saurian homeworld next year. Never thought I'd see the day. She smiled at Salith. Thank you, young prince, for welcoming our children. Salith bowed his head politely. Thank you for letting us learn from them. After she left, Daniel leaned back and watched the children play. Somewhere in the city, Sarah was starting her residency at a hospital that now regularly treated alien species. Across the galaxy, the exchange initiative was building bridges that would last generations. And it had all started because he'd seen a child drowning and done the only thing that mattered. He'd helped.